Hi, everyone! Welcome back to our TOEFL studies. I'm excited to see you here. Today, we're diving into academic discussion response essays. And this is a skill that can really boost your score. Our focus today is on how to answer a question fully without repeating yourself. Yes, that tricky trap that can make your essay feel redundant. I will also show you how to generate relevant ideas quickly so you never run out of things to say. Here's today's question and 2 responses in the question. Professor, should public transportation be free and funded by tax money? Kelly, no. Taxes are already too high, and people need that money for their own personal use. Paul, yes. Free public transportation could reduce pollution and encourage more people to use it. Let's first look at how to write an agreement-style essay. When you agree, you need to have your own reason that's different from the reasons already given by the students in the question. For example, if you agree with Kelly, who says free public transportation is a financial burden on families, your reason should not repeat that idea. What other reason could you use? One strong argument could be fairness. If some people don't use public transportation, or if their workplace isn't near a bus or subway route, then it's clearly unfair for them to pay taxes to support something they don't benefit from. The fairness argument is always very useful when you discuss policy-related questions like this.
I agree with Kelly that making public transportation free through tax money isn't a good idea. Besides adding financial pressure, it's also unfair to people who rarely use it. For example, I hardly ever take the bus because I live close to my workplace and usually walk or bike. If the government raised taxes to make buses and subways free, I'd still have to pay for something I don't use. Meanwhile, my friend who takes the bus every day would benefit much more, even though we pay the same taxes. That just doesn't feel fair. Instead of making transportation free for everyone, it would make more sense to improve service quality or lower fares for people who really depend on it.
Okay, everyone, let's take a closer look at this essay and highlight some organization words and phrases that you can use in your own writing. These are the building blocks that make your essay clear and easy to follow. First, stating your opinion. Look at this phrase, I agree with Kelly that. This is perfect for showing your position right from the start. It's simple, clear, and gets your point across immediately. Next, adding reasons. Words like besides and it's also are your friends here. They help you give multiple reasons without sounding repetitive. Now, giving examples. Use phrases like, for example. This is where you can show your ideas with a real-life situation, making your essay more convincing. Then, explaining personal experience or perspective. Phrases like, I hardly ever, or because I, or I'd still have to, let you connect the idea to your own life, which makes your argument stronger and more relatable. What about contrasting or comparing ideas? Words like meanwhile, or even though, or that just doesn't feel fair, are great for showing differences or conflicts in a way that's easy for the reader to follow. Finally, suggesting alternatives or concluding. Try phrases like instead of, and it would make more sense to. This is a strong way to wrap up your paragraph with a solution or suggestion. See how these words and phrases organize your ideas and guide your reader? If you use them in your own essays, your writing will feel structured, logical, and professional. Exactly what TOEFL graders are looking for.
Now let's agree with Paul. Besides reducing pollution, another strong reason to support free public transportation is that it can help solve traffic congestion, especially during rush hours. Every morning and evening, streets and downtown areas and near schools are packed with cars, and people get stressed worrying about being late for work or class. If you agree with Paul, you also need to address the tax issue, since that is a potential drawback. You can either argue against it, for example, by showing that people actually save money using public transportation instead of private cars, or you can concede the point, the bite-the-bullet approach, and then explain why free public transportation is still better overall, despite the cost. I agree with Paul that making public transportation free would be a great way to encourage more people to leave their cars at home and use buses or trains instead. When more people take public transit, traffic moves faster and cities become calmer and safer. For example, I remember when my city offered a week of free bus service last year, the difference was amazing. The usual long lines of cars during the morning rush were much shorter, and it was so much easier to get around. Of course, this would require funding through taxes, but if the result is less traffic, cleaner air, and less stress for everyone, I think it's worth it.
Okay, everyone. Let's take a closer look at this essay and highlight useful organization words and strategies you can use in your own writing. These are the tools that make your ideas clear and persuasive. First, stating your position. Notice the opening. Making public transportation free would be a great way to encourage more people to leave their cars at home. Here, would is used instead of will, because we're talking about a hypothetical situation. Public transportation isn't free yet. This is a proposal. Would shows a possible outcome, not a certainty. Using will here would make it sound like it's definite, which is not accurate in a discussion about opinions or suggested actions. Next, giving reasons. When more people take public transit, traffic moves faster and cities become calmer and safer. This is a clear, logical way to support your position with reasons. Now, adding examples. For example, I remember when my city offered a week of free bus service last year. The difference was amazing. Using, for example, helps you illustrate your point with a concrete situation, making your argument more convincing. Then, explaining results or benefits. The usual long lines of cars during the morning rush were much shorter, and it was so much easier to get around. This phrase shows the positive impact of the idea in a way that's easy for readers to follow along. Next, acknowledging potential challenges. Of course, this would require funding through taxes. Mentioning possible objections shows that you're thinking critically, which strengthens your argument. Finally, concluding effectively. But if the result is less traffic, cleaner air, and less stress for everyone, it's worth it. This wraps up your paragraph by reinforcing your point and emphasizing the benefits. See how these strategies organize your ideas and guide the reader smoothly? And remember, using would instead of will is important when you're talking about hypothetical situations, predictions, or the results of a proposed idea, which comes up a lot in TOEFL Academic Discussion questions. Using these techniques will make your writing clear, logical, and persuasive. Exactly what TOEFL graders want.
Now, let's write a disagreement essay. Why would you disagree with Kelly? Kelly opposes free public transportation because it is funded by tax dollars, and she believes that would leave people with less disposable income. To respond, you need to address this point directly. You can argue that, in reality, people may actually save money when free public transportation is implemented, since they spend less on gas, parking, and maintenance for their car.
This way, free public transportation could increase disposable income rather than reduce it. I respectfully disagree with Kelly. She argues that free public transportation funded by taxes would leave people with less money to spend, but I think the opposite is true. For example, I usually spend around $150 a month on gas, parking, and maintenance for my car. Even if taxes increased to fund free public transportation, the cost per person would likely be much lower than what I already spend. In other words, the tax contribution is small compared to the money I save by not having to drive. So free public transit could actually increase my disposable income. In addition, free public transportation reduces traffic congestion and makes commuting less stressful, which benefits everyone. For these reasons, I believe free public transportation is a better solution than Kelly suggests.
Okay, everyone. Now, let's look at this essay and identify the organization words and strategies that make it effective, especially how to disagree politely in your writing. First, stating your respectful disagreement. Notice the phrase, "I respectfully disagree with Kelly." This is a perfect way to disagree without sounding rude or confrontational. Very important in TOEFL essays. Next, acknowledging the other person's argument. She argues that free public transportation funded by taxes would leave people with less money to spend. Mentioning the other person's point first shows that you understand their perspective, which makes your response stronger. Now, giving reasons and examples. For example, I usually spend around $150 a month on gas, parking, and maintenance for my car. Using, for example, lets you support your argument with specific evidence, making it more convincing. Then, explaining the comparison or outcome. Even if taxes increased, the cost per person would likely be much lower than what I already spend. Phrases like, "in other words," help clarify your point and guide the reader through your reasoning. Next, adding additional benefits. In addition, free public transportation reduces traffic congestion and makes commuting less stressful, which benefits everyone. "In addition" is a useful phrase for adding extra reasons smoothly. Finally, concluding with your opinion. For these reasons, I believe free public transportation is a better solution than Kelly suggests. This wraps up the paragraph clearly, reinforcing your position while remaining polite. See how these phrases help you structure your essay, give examples, and disagree respectfully? Using them in your own writing makes your essay logical, persuasive, and polite. Exactly what TOEFL graders want.
If you disagree with Paul, you need to counter his main point, that free public transportation will reduce pollution. Explain why pollution reduction is not a guaranteed or foreseeable outcome. For example, people may still drive because transit routes are inconvenient, and adding more buses or trains could create pollution from fuel or electricity use. By pointing out these uncertainties, you show that free public transportation may not necessarily achieve the environmental benefits Paul claims. I respectfully disagree with Paul. He argues that free public transportation would reduce pollution, but I think this is not necessarily true. First, even if buses and subways are free, many people may still choose to drive their cars because public transit routes may not be convenient for everyone, especially in suburban or rural areas. Second, adding more buses and trains to accommodate increased ridership could itself create pollution, since most public transit vehicles still rely on fuel or electricity generated from non-renewable sources. Finally, free public transportation does not guarantee a decrease in car ownership or usage. People may still use their cars for convenience, and the environmental impact might remain the same. Given that free public transportation comes from our tax dollars and pollution reduction is not guaranteed, it may not be the most effective solution.
Okay, everyone.
Now let's look at this essay and highlight the organization words and strategies that make it effective. First, stating respectful disagreement. Notice the phrase, "I respectfully disagree with Paul." This immediately signals your polite stance while showing that you will present a counterargument. Next, acknowledging the other person's point. He argues that free public transportation would reduce pollution. This shows that you understand the other perspective, which makes your disagreement more credible and professional. Now, giving reasons in an organized way. First, even if buses and subways are free, many people may still choose to drive their cars. Second, adding more buses and trains to accommodate increased ridership could itself create pollution. Finally, free public transportation does not guarantee a decrease in car ownership. Using first, second, finally helps you structure multiple reasons clearly so the reader can follow your argument easily. Then, explaining your reasoning in detail. Phrases like, "Since most public transit vehicles still rely on fuel or electricity generated from non-renewable sources," clarify your points and show careful thinking. Finally, concluding with your opinion politely. Given that free public transportation comes from our tax dollars and pollution reduction is not guaranteed, it may not be the most effective solution. See how these words and strategies help you structure your essay, explain your points logically, and disagree politely? Using them in your own essays will make your writing professional, clear, and persuasive, exactly what TOEFL graders are looking for.
That's a wrap for today. I hope you now have a clear understanding of how to write TOEFL academic discussion essays. Remember, Dr. Nanhi Burns's TOEFL courses are an excellent way to master essay organization and persuasive examples so you can confidently tackle any question. Check it out at www.nanhiburns.com.